discrimination policy. It's their sixth principle. It says the enjoyment of the rights and freedoms set forth in this Olympic Charter shall be secured without discrimination of any kind, such as race, color, sex, sexual orientation, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Mouthful. This is a pretty good non-discrimination policy. It doesn't explicitly include gender identity or expression. That would make it better. However, I want to note two things. First, in many legal jurisdictions, including the US, Canada, and a few others, gender identity is already recognized as protected under protections against sex discrimination. So the recent Bostock Supreme Court decision in the US decided that Title VII includes, so under protections against sex discrimination in Title VII, that includes protections against gender identity discrimination. So trans people are covered by Title VII. Similar reasoning will apply to Title IX. That hasn't made its way to the Supreme Court, but it has made it to the district appeals court, circuit appeals court, which is the last level before the Supreme Court. So the US has already decided case after case after case, trans people are already protected against discrimination under the category of sex. So you can't say, well, this doesn't say gender identity or trans, so you're not protected. No, under many jurisdictions, we're already in there. But this policy is good because it's explicitly open-ended. It says, or other status. And gender identity and expression are undeniably relevant statuses that would fall under or other status. So there are two ways that trans people are already covered under this non-discrimination policy. Okay, so what did CAS have to say about gender verification tests? Well, the IOC and the IAAF stipulated that they banned gender verification testing. So the 1996 Atlanta Olympics was the last time the Olympics allowed sex verification testing by chromosomes. So they were basically testing for the presence of a Y chromosome only. And if you had a Y chromosome, no matter what else was going on with your body, you were deemed ineligible to be a female. And it turns out that chromosomes are not that simple. There are ways to have a Y chromosome but be female, not even including trans people. So in 1999, the Court of Arbitration for Sport and the IOC explicitly banned sex verification testing forever. So there is no longer a test for who counts as female or male. Also, they do not make a distinction between sex and gender. So they don't make a distinction between male and man or female and woman. They actually use them basically interchangeably. And UK, the 2010 UK Equality Act literally puts them together and says like the gender of a male or the sex of a woman, right? They use them interchangeably. Okay, so post 1999, no sex verification tests. Instead, in its place, the sex or gender of an athlete is a matter of law in the athlete's country of citizenship. And further, the distinction between male or female is a matter of legal recognition. So this is from the Duty Chand case. This is what they decided. Also, they said there are only two categories of competition, male and female. These categories are together intended to cover all athletes who wish to participate in competitive athletics. That means that if you are deemed an ineligible female, you are not allowed to compete with the men. You are out of competition. So if sport is a human right, deeming you an ineligible female means denying you a human right, which sets the justificatory burden very, very high, right? They have to show that excluding you is necessary and effective at promoting fairness in sport, that you could not have fair competition unless we banned you from women's competition. That's what's at stake here. And I'm going to show you that they cannot meet that burden. Now, the panel in this CAS decision was not convinced that they should adopt a self-identification policy, which is the policy I actually favor. And they basically said that, well, no one has really shown us, except for a few minor cases, that There are widespread self-identification policies. But the thing is, there are a few extremely important Olympic nations where there are self-identification policies. Canada is one of them. So in Canada, you can have your birth certificate sex changed and therefore all of your identity documents changed without either hormone therapy or genital surgery. So Canada also has, at the university level, a nationwide policy of self-identification, and we haven't had a single problem. So why is this important? Like, it's not to be all like jingoistic about Canada, but look, you hold the Olympics here kind of often, and we are top 10 in the medal counts usually, especially in the Winter Olympics. We are an important member nation. So they kind of dismiss the self-identification thing a little too easily. Now, the next thing I want to prove to you is that trans women are women, and that is just a fucking fact. Like, I can whip out all of my ID if you really want me to, and it says F on all of it. My US green card, my Canadian passport, my South Carolina driver's license, my Canadian driver's license, my social security card, like they all say female. I mean, the card doesn't say female, but you know, it's recorded as female. So trans women, it is just a fact, are legally women in many countries, including the US and Canada. Now, the US is kind of a mess. You guys are, you're weird because you've got this whole federal state thing going on. So federally, for years, since the Obama years, trans people can get a passport in their transitioned gender, but they might not be able to get their birth certificate changed if they're in a shitty state like Texas that has laws against changing your birth certificate. So that's kind of unfortunate that you could live in one state that's progressive unless you change your birth certificate, or you could be unlucky enough to be born in a state that doesn't. Like that's unfair. Now, I said that governments and sports federations make no distinction between sex and gender. So a lot of people try to say that, well, okay, fine, trans women are women, but you're not female, and sport is about being female, and that's why you're excluded because you're actually male. That is false. Medically, all my medical records, they say female. Trans girls are actually female. They are girls. Trans women are women. They are female. Trans boys are male, right? We need to just get over this. Also, medically speaking, you don't need to talk about things like male genitalia, right? You can just use the medical terms like penis, right? There's nothing male about it. You don't need these terms. That's a different topic. We can talk about that in the question period. This produces a problem because we have this patchwork within the US, but also a global patchwork, that there are inconsistencies in how easy it is for a trans athlete to get legal recognition. So what I proposed to the IOC in person was that they should adopt their most liberal member states policy law and apply it to all countries for the purposes of Olympic competition. So if you're born in Saudi Arabia and you're a trans woman, you can't get legal recognition as a woman there, but the IOC has the option of recognizing you as a woman for the purposes of Olympic competition, even though your home country won't, based on the policies of another country like Canada. And I think that's what they should do in the interest of global justice. They haven't done that yet. I'm hopeful. I'm not holding my breath. Okay, so let's talk about what fairness in sport is. And I want you to ponder just for a moment, like, what is fairness in sport? Like, what does that mean? At least some people are going to say something like, well, it's a level playing field. That's what fairness in sport means. Well, what the hell does a level playing field mean? Quite literally, the origin of the phrase is that the terms of play should not give the home team an unfair advantage, right? So the field shouldn't be tilted in a certain way that favors one side over another. And sports have ways of overcoming this too, right? Even if you're playing in the home team's arena or field or whatever, they have you switch sides. In tennis, right, there's wind and sun considerations. Every 2 games, you switch sides. It's to even out the conditions of play to be as similar as possible for all athletes. So if that's what you mean by fairness, is that the conditions of play are the same, then what's your problem with trans athletes, right? We're playing by the same rules, under the same conditions, fairness. Okay, well, then they're like, well, that's not what I really mean by level playing field. I mean something like every athlete should have an equal chance of winning, right? Well, that's nonsense, because if it were actually the case that fairness means equal chance of winning, that means that no athlete can have a competitive advantage over another athlete. And there are a few things wrong with that view. One-on-one competitions just turn into coin flips, or a 6-person event turns into a roll of a 6-sided die. And that is not what we want sport to be. And that is not what sport is. Sport is not coin flips, right? It is not about chance outcomes. Second, the whole point of training and nutrition and equipment and coaching and facilities and rest and all this shit that we do to be professional athletes is done with the explicit purpose of gaining a competitive advantage over our competitors. And that's what we want out of sport, right? We want excellence. We want to push ourselves. So fairness cannot mean no competitive advantage. All right. So maybe fairness means you can't have too much of a competitive advantage. And let's put that in our back pocket. Philosophically speaking, there is relatively little theorizing about what fairness in sport actually requires. Basically, there's a book, a paper, and then my work that we've published. One way to think about fairness, just as a social construct and justice, is that it's a cooperative venture as a social union. So Sigmund Lowland is sort of the biggest proponent of this, but also this paper by Coggan, Hammond, and Holm. I'm going to draw on both of these. They basically share the same view. So they say things like an athlete may benefit from being allowed to participate and in exchange surrenders liberty to the extent that his or her fellow athletes agree. They say things like, we may therefore conceive of taking part in sport as the consensual participation in a game with agreed binding rules that are known from the beginning. This means that it can be fair to treat participants differently so long as it has been agreed to by all the players. From Lowland, he says we should choose norms or rules that no one could reasonably reject as a basis of unforced, informed general agreement to the rules of sport. And I am here to say no. That is not how these things work. That is not how fairness works. They are fucking it up. The thing is, when you try to use this kind of framework of so long as it has been agreed to by all the players or no one could reasonably reject, anyone who knows anything about feminist theory or critical race theory, you're already going to know where I'm going. It's you got to ask, who is the we here, right? Who is included in the all the players or no one could reasonably reject? Because are we including the trans and intersex athletes we're trying to exclude? Usually not. Usually when people say, well, we should ask the other athletes, by which they mean the cisgender, non-intersex women athletes, if they agree to include trans women. And if any of them object, then it's unfair. And that is a bullshit way to think about fairness. That is what John Rawls calls the tyranny of the majority. You do not want a majority of people to be able to deprive the rights of a minority just because they're in the majority. So this idea that no reasonable person, well, who's the reasonable person? Because this trans person here is reasonably objecting to being excluded from sport. And yet we don't seem to be included in that discussion. So the thing is, both of these groups approaching fairness in this way are drawing on the work of John Rawls. And specifically, fairness for Rawls involves this mechanism that he calls the veil of ignorance. So he asks, what policies would we agree to as self-interested, rational people if we didn't know who we were? If somehow